I had this really cool plan to do a major unboxing for Leviathan. I mean, after all, 10th edition flagship box is going to be awesome. It's got so many models. It is just a brick of sprues and plastic that we were going to have to get a chance to look at. A new book, the cards, everything. Unfortunately, Games Workshop didn't seem to think I was worthy enough to get an advanced copy. And kidding aside, that's not fair. Obviously, Games Workshop has been very generous to us here at the on the show, and they've been sending us a lot of materials to work with. Unfortunately, Leviathan is one of those things where supply is limited this early in the run, and we only got one box for the whole of 40K Radio and Warhammer Workshop. Fortunately, Matt Alex, my co-host on 40K Radio, who did receive the box, was kind enough to send me as fast as he could the Tyranid portion so that I could build and paint them for the show, for the network, so that we would have something to look at. Unfortunately, that does mean that we're not going to be getting a proper unboxing. I don't get to pop open a box, go through the box, and like look at the book, leaf through it. And Matt doesn't really do that kind of content, but he needed to keep the book so that we could talk about like the new rules and release. It's a whole thing, but I got some Tyranid models, and we're gonna have a look at that. Now, I wanted originally to do as close to a proper unboxing as I could with it, but I had to open the box just to make sure that Matt had included the instructions. Otherwise, I needed to contact him and ask him to send me something digital so that I knew how to assemble the models. They're push fit, but still. So he did send me the instructions, so that was fine. We got them right here. The only portion I have of the Space Marines is this one page, because everything after that is instructions on how to assemble Tyranids, which is great. It's what I need. Matt just absolutely tore the hell out of this booklet to get it to me, and you know what? Any violence done in my name, I approve of. That doesn't matter. The important thing is that we have the sprues and we can dig right in. Now, the first one on top, coincidentally, is the Tyrant Prime with wings, which it's an exciting model, if only because it heralds the probable return of Shrikes. Shrikes, for those who don't know, are flying Tyranid warriors, which are just neat. I am expecting that if we do get new Shrikes, they would be plastic, they would be a new kit, and probably a little less menacing than this guy. But even so, this is just one model, you can already see sort of the direction it's taking as far as the modeling is concerned. If you have seen other Tyranid models, you know that these little chimneys, little spines on the back, are usually extremely smooth, very, very regular. And since we're all starting to paint more and more, especially new players with contrast paints, smooth surfaces are the enemy of contrast. So everything for the Tyranid you can see is so much more amenable, has so much more texture to it. From these spines, the wings with all those folds, and even if you look at the chitin on the legs, you'll notice that they have a lot more scratches and details for contrast paints to really do their thing. So this is a cool model. I mean, we've seen it enough that we don't need to belabor it too much, but it is one of the models that I will be painting, because the plan is to paint the Combat Patrol equivalent of the box. As Leviathan comes with Space Marines and Tyranids, and enough models on each side to recreate what's going to be in the Combat Patrols so that you can play Combat Patrol rules. Which is fantastic, because I want to explore those rules. They are a new thing in 10th edition that we haven't really seen yet. They look to be a much more cerebrally balanced approach to the game, in the sense that you don't need to worry about list building. This is your list. Your victory is going to be determined by choices on the gaming board and on the battlefield, as well as a generous portion of luck. So the next thing I have is bases, which oddly enough are worth talking about. Not much. I mean, we know about the sizes, what to expect. This is very likely the one for the Screamer Killer. This is probably for the Neurotyrant. What's interesting is that those big guys have holes in them, hexagonal holes, as well as every other ones of the bases all have the hexagonal holes, which I suspect is not necessarily going to be an immediate important feature of the models themselves. They're probably still easy to attach to a flat base by removing that hexagonal peg, but this is probably just a side effect of doing the push fit for the models to be easy and quick to assemble, so you can get them on the battlefield as soon as possible. So the next thing I have are the Gaunts. Now the Gaunts come to about 3 or 4 sprue, depending on which sprue, and they have a very similar build format as the previous Gaunts, in the sense that you have a main body with 2 legs, and then a sort of sub portion of the body that has the 2 other legs. The advantage of this compared to the other Gaunts is that, first of all, they're a lot more dynamic, a lot less boring. The head is pre-assembled, doesn't come in 2 pieces as we used to see. And those just seem to have different poses from one Gaunt to another. So these look like they're going to be a lot easier to assemble. They have a lot more texture to them. They look cooler. The only thing that's kind of, I don't want to say a disappointment, but an oddity, is that they only seem to come with 1 weapon type. You don't get the Spine Fist, you don't get Devourers, you only have the standard weapon that comes with Gaunts. I wonder if that means that these other weapon options are just invalidated, or will there be another version of this unit available? It seems unlikely because this is a major resculpt, but you never know. So the next thing is the little cousins of the Termagants is the Neurogons. They seem to have the very similar configuration of a larger body with a smaller part, and you attach them. They all seem to be 2-part models, very simple to assemble, but they also look like they're so much smaller than their Gaunt cousins. Like, look at these guys. They're just tiny little dudes compared to the much larger Termagants. Then again, I mean, if you've seen the stats, you know that they're not exactly impressive. They're just meant to be sort of a relay for the hive mind nodes. I'm hoping that means that there's going to be some interesting synergy, because so far, although I absolutely adore them all, they're adorable, I don't think they're very strong on the battlefield. But if the Tyranid army relies on as much synergy as it seems to be, then there might be more to these guys as more rules get released. Next, another cousin of the Termagant is the Barb Gaunt. The Barb Gaunt is larger than the Termagant, but that's mostly due because they have an entire other creature hitched on their back. Slightly more complex to assemble, but still you get 5 on a sprue. It's very economical. And again, you can see a ton of detail. It's almost intimidating. One of the things that's fun about Tyranids in general is that you can pick 2 colors, one for the chitin, one for the skin, and you've got 90% of your model done. But now that you're doing separate creatures that kind of need to have their own look on the back, you need to pick out a little bit more details. It's a welcome change if you're a modeler. Like, I like painting, so I'm excited about it. But that means that if you're doing swarm things, you may end up painting for a long time before you get anything on the table. Next is probably one of my favorite models in this box, and that is the Psychophage. Just the other day, yesterday actually, I was going through some of my old Tyranid stuff, and I took out my old Carnifex sprues. I have a brand new Carnifex, and it is one of the most inefficient use of a frame that I've ever seen. It's something like 3 frames for a Carnifex. You get a bunch of weapon choices that you're not going to use, and there is tons of empty spaces between the frames, between the pieces on the frame. You could have easily done 1.5 frames instead of 3. This is the exact opposite. This contains the entire Psychophage. It is roughly the same size as a Carnifex. And it's got everything on basically what is half of a Carnifex frame. It's It's gorgeous in economics. Obviously, it doesn't have options. That makes it a lot simpler. But at the same time, it is nice to know that you can go from this to a full large-scale model pretty quickly. And you can see the detail, like just in the carapace. It's so much more complex and interesting than what we've seen in the other large creatures. So, yeah, I'm genuinely happy about this. I'm glad that I'm going to have more than one. Hopefully they're worth it on the battlefield. The next frame I want to look at with you guys is the I keep wanting to say Lictor because they look so much like freaking Lictors, but these are Vanarine Leapers. And to be fair, they look a little smaller than your typical metal Lictor. It's just probably because they can do more finesse with plastic, but at the same time, it gives them more of a different look as far as scale and appearance on the table than I assumed they would have, judging from the photos. So you can see just how much more finesse and how more slender all of these limbs look. The mantis claws in particular look a lot... They look deadlier because they're not as blunt as what we're used to seeing with metals. And you get all three of the models in a single frame. There's a lot of single frame units in this box, in this configuration. And I'm hoping that means we're going to not pay too much for each of these units once they come out individually. But I mean, we'll see. Anyways, I'm oddly excited for Vanarine Leapers. I'm hoping they're really cool on the tabletop because Lictors were solo operators that couldn't do much, and these guys are more of they're a unit. They act as a pack, so that might be more interesting. The last frame, Matt split in two for shipping convenience, and quick glance, you can immediately tell that this is this is a combined frame for the Screamer Killer and for the Neurotyrant, which this bears discussion. So first of all, let's have a look at the scale of the size of this Screamer Killer. When I first saw it, it looked to me as if it would be smaller than your typical Carnifex, but instead it just looks like a standing Carnifex. It looks like your normal Carnifex standing up on two legs, and looks fairly massive. Look at it. So it's got a different position, but all the elements are there. It's got the same kind of the same back, the same chimneys, the attachment of the legs. The legs are very similar, all more detailed than the previous version, but nothing as different as I thought it would be. And of course, it's got a completely different face and the different claws to give it the classic Screamer Killer look. The Neurotyrant looks lovely. One of the things that I love is the amount of detail, going so far as to have like these little creatures that seem to be growing from within the carapace. And I'll need to see once it's assembled, but I don't think these are going to be very easy to see. They're not going to be very visible, which is a little hilarious. Like, it's one of those things where Games Workshop creates details that you have a lot of fun painting and then no one gets to enjoy seeing. Now, the thing that's annoying about this being a combined frame is these are two models that I expect we're going to want to see available independently. Not everyone is going to want 3 Screamer Killer in their army is going to want 3 Neurotyrants. So does that mean that we're going to see a lot of these models on the second market, or are we going to see new sculpts for both of these? It would be, new sculpts might be an exaggeration, because you could just re-sprue and reconfigure a frame to contain either of these models independently. But are we going to see a repackaging is what I mean. No way to tell. It's going to be interesting to see. These are not models that are into combat patrol. So again, not an issue as far as that's concerned. In fact, this sprue and the Neurogon sprue are the two only sprues that are not in the combat patrol at a quick glance. In hindsight, I wish I had seen what the Space Marine sprues are like, because I suspect that the characters are probably independent sprues in the same way as the Tyrant Prime with wings is. but I'm curious if there's any other strange configurations. Probably not, because if I remember clearly, well, first of all, this is going to be independent for sure. Characters being independent also, but we also know that in the Combat Patrol First Space Marines, you get 5 of these guys and you get 5 Terminators. So I suspect the Terminators are their own thing. I don't think there's gonna be any of these combined things. I could ask Matt, but as soon as I know, we're probably gonna talk about it on 40K Radio or on one of the podcasts for Warhammer Workshop. Anyways, this is what we're looking at, and I guess we should start assembling. Welcome back, everyone. I'm really sorry you had to stare at that ugly mug for so long, but this is what we've got. Not the best unboxing that we've had so far, unfortunately. It's a good thing I had these cool little monstrous creatures to shove in your face so that you can concentrate on the cool plastic. But yeah, it's a big disappointment for us that we didn't get I didn't get a Leviathan box to unbox right in front of you to show you everything that was in there. I did contact Games Workshop, just asking them, hey, what's up? Because usually for big releases like that, they're very generous in giving us all the content that we need so that we can do the videos or the painting guides or whatever any content creator does. But they were very transparent with it. They said, like, we have limited stock, we can't send everything to everyone this time around. We're sorry. We hope that what we did send you is going to be sufficient. And to be fair, Matt Alex from the 40K podcast was like, didn't hesitate. He runs Tyranids. He's a Tyranid collector himself, but he didn't hesitate a minute, and he just sent me the models for the Tyranid portion of Leviathan as quickly as possible so that I could paint some up, get some on the website, and get this video going. So all in all, making the best of a non-perfect situation. Speaking of the assembly of the Leviathan miniatures, I didn't assemble all of them immediately out of the box. My plan, as stated earlier, was to build the essential for a combat patrol, because that's what I want to run first and foremost as soon as the rules hit the ground. On top of that, as you can see, I'm also building Neurotyrant, because it's just a cool model. I really wanted to paint it. And I may have jumped the gun on painting it because, as it turns out, I'll explain a little bit more about my painting technique later on. But the thing is, I've been running these Tyranids for over 2 decades. This is a very old paint scheme. The last thing I painted for that paint scheme was a Parasite of Mortrex, but I've not really evolved the techniques that I use. This is a much older model. You can see it's almost the same. It's a little less precise, but that's more of a skill issue than it is in the techniques I use. I don't use contrast paints. There's washes. I've started using a very weird way that I'll demonstrate a little bit later. So I should have kept the Neurotyrant to try to update some of the techniques that I use on my Tyranids. I think the last big update on technique is what you're seeing right now, is when I started doing airbrushing, 15 years ago, that I updated how I do things. So one of the things to note that I discovered building the other models from the box before painting them, well, after painting the batch I'm doing right now, is one little detail about the Neurogons is that I expected these to be units of 10, 9 normal Gaunts and one being a node beast, the larger version. But instead, you get 10 of the normal ones and a node beast. I'm very curious how that is going to translate to the tabletop and on the data cards. But it's a weird oddity. Usually, especially recently, Games Workshop has been very keen on doing multiples of 5 for units. So that's something to look forward to. I've also built the Screamer Killer, which I thought would turn out to be roughly the scale of a current edition Carnifex, plastic Carnifex. However, it does seem to be a little bit bulkier. Something that you'll notice on the tabletop, like not in a 2-for-1 portion, like it's not Like, it's not a Land Raider next to a Rhino, but it is definitely bulkier. See, this is how I use, if we're going to talk about painting technique, this is how I use washes on my Tyranid technique. Like, this isn't a painting guide, so I'm skipping some steps. You might notice if you look carefully that there's already some shading done. But what I do with the Null Oil on the turquoise here is just go pick out some of the areas that I want the shade to be more obvious, to be more clean. And because of the nature of the wash, like, I'm not putting it on everything because I don't want to darken the results, but it just gives that extra crispness to those ridges. So another thing that's interesting, you might have noticed as I was painting this, I was using turquoise. I've been using what used to be called Hawk Turquoise 20 years ago. I've used the more modern iteration. It's a layer paint, but it spreads almost like a base coat, so very high pigmentation, no problem to be had. And one thing that was a big disappointment to me, I'm probably going to be able to make it for the actual launch of Apocalypse, but I really wanted to have as much of the combat patrol done as early as possible, and I did have these grand plans of doing everything before today, before the launch of this video. But it turns out that 20 Termagants and 3 Vanarine Leapers and this big beast, it turned out to be a lot. Like, it's simple to assemble. I was very joyful about how few pieces you needed to do, but once you notice how many teeth there are in his mouth, how much detail there is, how much surface there is to do, and I didn't manage to do everything quite yet. I'll probably be able to, because I did advance everything to a certain degree. I just had to sort of stop and concentrate on some specific pieces to really just make sure I had something done by today. Another thing that I should note, I'm going to put it on screen now, but I did try to advance my technique by using one of Termagants as a test. Using it is sort of, I don't want to call it slap shot, but using contrast paints to get more depth, and it just ruined the colors. So I had to not go in that direction. So this is the final results. These models are super fun to paint. They're super cool to do. I may do a painting guide because I've had a lot of questions on how I do these units. But if I do, it'll be sort of based on what I've been doing so far. So there's not going to be a lot of the modern techniques. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Materials shown in this video are provided fully or in part by Games Workshop for promotional purposes. If you enjoyed this video, please consider dropping us a like and subscribing. Thanks for watching.